Welcome back to another episode of The Evidence Room. This week we're profiling the many cases against Robert Durst. This is a man that wherever he went, death and a cloud of suspicion followed. In fact, his life was so bizarre, we're going to have to hit the road to tell this story. Let's go meet up with retired KPRC2 journalist Phil Archer, and he's going to help us understand how a New York real estate heir wound up living as a deaf-mute woman in a Galveston boarding house. And, oh yeah, that was before he killed and dismembered his neighbor.
This man has an 8 to 10 year history of killing women all across the country.
An employee coming in just after 8 this morning made the horrible discovery. 4 employees of the Malibu Grand Prix stabbed to death.
She doesn't dispute that she stabbed her husband a staggering 193 times.
Harris's 16-year-old daughter witnessed her stepmother run the wheels of her Mercedes over her dad several times.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women.
So we're going to head to Galveston, but we're going to make a pit stop first because I think...
Yes, he did.
So you know where we're going.
Well, that's the thing. He was always doing things that shocked or surprised people.
One of the things that I remember is he lived in that high-rise right there. And people around here kind of remembered him, but they remembered him more because he would walk around with a backpack full of cash. Just pay for things in cash.
I mean, his behavior was just odd as it gets.
The detour before Galveston was to go by this CVS. Do you remember what he did here?
Oh, yeah, very well, because everybody knew what he did there at the time it happened.
The video hasn't been made public until tonight. It shows Robert Durst at the pharmacy picking up a prescription. He's at the front checkout counter in the white hat and white shirt. Durst bends down for some reason and then, without warning, stands up and starts peeing on the candy in front of the register.
This was a medical mishap, and plain and simple, he had to go and he couldn't hold it.
Channel 2 Investigates requested the video under open records laws. The night it happened last July, police did not immediately arrest Durst. He later turned himself in. The DA let him plead no contest to a lesser charge, one on the same level as a traffic ticket.
Did he inherit all his money, or did he make some of it, or was it a mixture?
A little bit of both. The Durst family is a great American story. It truly is a rags to riches story. Seymour Durst came to this country at the turn of the last century with $3 in his pocket, and now that family business is worth about $8 billion, according to Forbes.
When did the family decide to cut ties with Durst?
His behavior was problematic.
Like what?
Apparently he spent most days walking around the office, muttering to himself and peeing in the wastebaskets. And after a little of that, the family decided, well, we can't run a business this way. Durst didn't walk away empty-handed. They made a nice settlement in the tens of millions of dollars. They essentially bought him out of the family business. But he never got over that. He always carried a grudge toward his brother Douglas.
Tell me about Durst's first wife. She just vanished, right?
Right. When they met, she was a dental hygienist, and the courtship was brief. They didn't know each other for very long before he invited her to move in with him, and then they got married. And at the time of her disappearance, she was just a couple of months away from graduating medical school.
Yes.
Marianne Monroe of Houston covets a note from her friend, Kathleen McCormack, who became Kathleen Durst, the wife of Robert Durst. The note was written in the 8th grade when she and Marianne, then McGrath, were students at Notre Dame School, graduates of 1966.
Kathleen wanted to be a model, and she was tall and beautiful. She had gorgeous brown hair. She had great poise. She always liked to look good.
They attended grammar school together in New Hyde Park, New York, and went off to different high schools. Kathleen wrote this note to Marianne. It said, "I'll never forget you as a wonderful person and good luck. Love, Kathy." Marianne next heard about her friend when she disappeared.
The front page of the Daily News. And it was odd because we lived not so far from each other after we had become adults.
She believes Kathleen would have become a successful physician and researcher. She just hopes that the latest arrest of Robert Durst leads to answers for a peaceful woman who apparently died a violent death.
Who really, really hope that ultimately he is charged and there is an end to this for her mother and for her brother.
So about the time he came here is about the time they reopened the investigation in her disappearance, right?
That's correct.
Around the year 2000?
That's why he came here. He was scared. He was on the run.
No clear reason why he picked Galveston, just...
No.
Durst lived a bizarre life before settling into this Galveston apartment where he posed as a mute woman. Durst was accused of shooting his neighbor Morris Black, cutting up his body and tossing the parts into Galveston Bay. Durst admitted to all of it, except he claimed the gun went off accidentally when he struggled with Black, who attacked him. So this is where he lived.
Yeah, this is the murder scene.
Well, yeah, so naturally when you look at this, it doesn't exactly scream New York real estate air.
No, it doesn't. It's not fancy. He's obviously, at that time, trying to stay under the radar, but in a strange way. At the same time, he's dressing as a woman in such a way as to draw attention to himself.
Right, he wasn't very good at the disguise.
Yeah, so while he's trying to go underground here, live in a sort of nondescript house in a working class neighborhood in Galveston, he's also going around town dressed as a woman and obviously a man, so he was getting a lot of attention.
I met Robert Durst through working at Garza's Kontiki way back when.
Claire Schuler goes by the stage name CC Ryder. He met Robert Durst in the early 2000s. Schuler remembers Durst was intensely shy but a generous tipper who became a regular at island drag shows.
He was very infatuated with the drag queens that performed and their hair and their makeup, especially the hair and the makeup.
Schuler remembers when he first met the Manhattan real estate mogul, he was pretending to be a deaf-mute woman who went by the name Dorothy.
When you saw him in drag, honey, ooh, it was not pretty. It was not pretty. It was blue eyeshadow and red lips. Not pretty.
Schuler says Durst was interested in learning how to apply makeup, making a wig look real, and how to curl hair.
As they say, the lady that taught the lady to be a lady.
Schuler says during those learning moments, Durst never let anyone touch him, take pictures, or talked about his personal life. Months later, Durst's name was splashed across the headlines. He had been arrested for killing and dismembering his neighbor, Morris Black, at this Galveston boarding house. Police and reporters then showed up to talk with Schuler.
Hey, we're here to talk to you about the Robert Durst situation. And I was just like, who's Robert Durst?
Schuler says he thought Durst was just an older divorcee coming to grips with his sexuality. Looking back, he says, there were some red flags, but...
Not a flag as a, hey, I'm here to kill you and chop your head off, and there you go, see you later, thanks, bye.
For some reason, Durst decided that not only he had to kill him, but dissect him and put his body parts in bags and throw them into the bay.
So he shot him, right?
Yeah.
And then he chopped him up?
Then he chopped him up, and he claimed that he shot him in self-defense, and then further that he chopped him up and put him in bags and threw him in the bay because he was freaked out, upset. He was anxious. He was in 3 plastic bags, as I remember, and it washed up on shore. 13-year-old boy who was fishing saw it and went over and investigated and then called police when he figured out what he had there.
They never found the head?
Never found the head. And, when you think about it, he decided instead of trying to carry the body away that he would dismember him, and he did it in that apartment. And he did it with a knife, 2 saws, and an axe. Now, that's an incredibly bloody, awful operation.
So if they never found the head, how were police able to, one, figure out it was Morris Black, and then find out Morris Black was connected to New York real estate heir Robert Durst?
Well, they found a slip of paper that had the address, Morris's address, on it in one of the bags. So from there, it was pretty much standard police work. They went to that address, found out who lived there, found out who was missing. And that was Morris Black.
For 6 long weeks, court observers watched a very rich man nervously twitch in the defendant's chair, charged with murder, until 2 simple words from Judge Susan Chris.
Not guilty.
The twitch was gone, replaced by deep sighs of relief. He'd beaten a murder rap, and there would be no lesser charges.
I think it's horrible. I can't believe he got off.
Anger from some Galvestonians who resent Robert Durst for escaping New York because of the pressures of his family's fortune and the probing media concerns about his first wife's mysterious disappearance. Robert Durst rented a $300 a month apartment in Galveston. He found a buddy, his neighbor, Morris Black, and Durst said they drank often and he was high on marijuana every day.
I think the Galveston prosecutors did a lousy job. I think they didn't prepare, they didn't try hard enough, and at some point in the process, they gave up. I think they thought, because of the heinous nature of the crime, that it was just going to be what they call a laydown in criminal justice trials. I think they thought because he cut a body up, they were just going to walk in there and shock a jury and get a verdict of guilty. But they were going up against Dick DeGuerin and Mike Ramsey and Chip Lewis, and they should have prepared. No matter how strong you think your case is, you should come into the courtroom prepared, and they did not.
He probably was stalking her at one point after he was released. You remember, he's not supposed to be in Galveston, all right? That's part of his parole.
Right.
One day he shows up, the judge runs into him at the mall. Now, that's quite a coincidence that the trial judge that heard your case, you just happened to run into him at the mall.
It's come a long way. When Dick and I first met him, he had been 40 years under the influence of one drug or another.
Durst's top criminal defense team found a way to get past the horrifying details of a stoned and drunk Robert Durst that September morning in this Avenue K fourplex.
The worst part about this case was what Bob did after Morris Black was dead. He dismembered and discarded the body, and he fled, not once but twice.
Ultimately, jurors felt that prosecutors did not rule out the possibility that the gun went off accidentally as the two struggled for control.
It wasn't proven, so you have reasonable doubt.
And that moment was immortalized. I mean,
right.
You know, there was a photographer in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And the look on Durst's face said it all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think he expected that. I mean, it was a phenomenal verdict.
Everybody reported that I looked absolutely shocked. I would have been shocked if they'd come back and said guilty. I can't say that I expected them to come back and say not guilty, because a hung jury was what I expected. But I remember turning to Dick and saying, did they say not? And then turning to Chip and saying, did they say not?
Chris Lovell and his fellow jurors explained an unpopular verdict.
I changed my mind a dozen times.
Lovell was a juror in the Robert Durst case. Durst was accused of shooting and killing his neighbor, Morris Black, then throwing his dismembered body into Galveston Bay. Durst said the shooting was accidental. Prosecutors said that Durst wanted to steal Black's identity. Despite what some thought would be a guilty verdict, the jury said no.
It's tough. I've lost friends over it. There was, some co-workers that didn't see eye to eye over this decision, but that's just the way it is. I didn't necessarily like it, but, I'm glad I made the decision I've made.
He also was spotted hanging around the house he shared with Morris Black. It's like he's going on a nostalgia tour. But the problem was a violation of his parole. He wasn't supposed to be in Galveston at all.
Last Friday, this woman says she saw Durst walking outside the house he used to live in.
He just stopped and hesitated a few seconds and kept walking.
It's where Durst admitted to killing and then dismembering the body of his neighbor, Morris Black. Durst was acquitted of murder charges claiming self-defense, but in another trial was put on supervised release for jumping bail. Under supervision, Durst was not to leave his Midtown apartment without permission from his parole officer. So when he allegedly made his way back to Galveston, he violated his parole.
Why is he there? What does he want? What is he doing? What is he looking for, you know?
This former neighbor called the Galveston Police Department, but the responding officer never found Durst.
That information was turned over to the parole office, and they are conducting a follow-up investigation.
That investigation ended this afternoon. Durst was arrested for violating his parole.
He was surprised, but he was cooperative. He had just mentioned that he had a meeting, and so we notified his attorneys, and we transported him to the Harris County Jail.
But the question remains, what was Durst doing back in Galveston? One of his attorneys has this idea.
I feel pretty comfortable that Bob's trip to Galveston had everything to do with looking for a place to live and nothing to do with anything nefarious.
But his former neighbor has her own hunch.
I've read that a lot of the people return to the scene of the crime, so I don't know.
Now, he also got arrested in New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
And what was that for?
Well, that was, of course, after the Jinx had aired. And all of a sudden, he's the top topic of conversation again across the nation. And it is believed that he was planning to make his way to Cuba because Cuba has no extradition treaty with the United States.
How old were you when your mother died?
The eccentric millionaire talks publicly for the first time in The Jinx, the life and deaths of Robert Durst.
No, he is innocent.
He's managed to get away with 3 murders.
Cleared of murdering a Galveston neighbor in 2003, Durst is suspected in 2 other deaths, though he's never been charged, and his former attorney insists he's not guilty of anything.
I don't think he has anything to hide.
Dick DeGuerin successfully defended Durst. DeGuerin appears in the movie.
He's been pilloried. People just think he's nuts. He's not nuts.
Wednesday night in the Big Easy. Right in the thick of it all is the JW Marriott. Inside, and a quick ride on the elevator to floor 23, a glimpse into what Robert Durst saw minutes before his arrest. This was his hotel room, 2303. According to this search warrant, Durst had all he needed to prepare for a new life on the run. Police found more than $42,000 in his hotel room and $100 bills kept in small envelopes. Also found in the room, a loaded gun with 4 rounds, a rubber latex mask, which would cover an individual's head and neck. UPS tracking numbers that Durst told police were for a shipment of a large sum of cash.
He's the man with the quirky personality.
He's strange.
And huge fortune, whose relatives and friends seem to unexpectedly disappear. His first wife vanished, his best friend shot to death, and his Galveston neighbor dismembered.
It seemed like he liked this cat and mouse.
Yes.
He liked to get caught for little things and then kind of play cat and mouse with these much larger crimes.
Yeah, there's a huge narcissistic streak there. I think you get the impression that Durst was a guy who thought he was probably smarter than everybody else.
When was Susan Berman murdered?
While Durst was living in Galveston. So and he was convicted of her murder, so we have to assume that he flew to LA, where she lived, to commit that killing, and then came back here. Put his wig back on and went back to living the life of a fugitive.
Why did it take so long to go from when Susan Berman was murdered to the trial?
Well, they didn't have much of a case, it was my understanding, and the Jinx kind of blew that up.
That's the HBO documentary.
Right. Now, it was kind of a national sensation. He appeared to have made a confession of guilt in that newscast or in that telecast. So that would have put pressure, first of all, on the DA in LA to wrap that up, to investigate thoroughly and come to a conclusion, find a murderer.
Kill them all.
At issue is whether Robert Durst set himself up, whether he says too much about what he might know in the documentary The Jinx, which aired on HBO.
The slender reed that they're going to rely on is that now famous envelope.
Channel 2 legal analyst Brian Weiss is referring to this envelope, the handwriting allegedly by Durst. It appears in the documentary. Some believe it matches a letter alerting investigators to a body, a woman investigators in Los Angeles suspect Durst killed. That woman is crime writer Susan Berman, a longtime friend of the real estate heir. Berman was shot dead back in 2000.
This is not the strongest murder case.
While Weiss is skeptical, apparently the FBI and the Los Angeles County District Attorney are not. FBI agents arrested Durst last night in New Orleans at the JW Marriott Hotel. This is his booking picture.
Unless and until we see that evidence, again, exposed to the crucible of cross-examination and confrontation in a courtroom, I really think we're grasping at straws.
But some say the envelope is the smoking gun. Investigators believe Susan Berman knew a lot about Durst's role in the mysterious disappearance of his wife Kathleen in 1982. They believe he killed her in 2000, just as that case was warming up. And now they might just be turning to a handwriting sample to crack their case.
I mean, was that a cry for attention? Or was that just Robert Durst being Robert Durst? Mumbling to himself.
But I remember there was a big point of contention because he was technically in the bathroom, but he still had his wireless mic on.
Yeah.
And they were still rolling while he was in the bathroom.
Right. Yes.
Robert Durst is charged in the murder of his friend Susan Berman, suspected in the disappearance of his wife Kathleen, and was acquitted in the murder and dismemberment of his neighbor Morris Black. Now the FBI is trying to determine if he may be connected to even more cases. Cody Gonzalez doesn't think so. He's the Galveston police officer who investigated Morris Black's killing.
If you back him in a corner, if you try to take away his freedom, he will kill you. He will kill you. But I just don't think he's out there like your typical serial killer out trying to find people to kill.
Durst's close friend Susan Berman was shot to death in December 2000 at her Benedict Canyon home. Gonzalez says it happened shortly after she told a friend she knew something about the disappearance of Durst's wife in 1982. Something big.
I think she said something to the effect, I know something that'll knock the socks off the investigation. And I think that got back to Bobby.
Gonzalez was featured in the HBO documentary that connected Durst to Berman's killing through analysis of a note, presumably written by the killer. It was sent to police before Berman's body was found. Los Angeles police had also identified Durst as the probable author of the now infamous cadaver note as early as 2002. Even without the murder charge, Durst could face up to 30 years in prison in Louisiana on weapons charges. Cody Gonzalez says prison is where Durst belongs. Durst's attorneys say he's innocent. Phil Archer, KPRC Channel 2 News.
Did you kill Susan Berman?
No.
Do you know who did?
No, I do not.
Why did he kill her?
Because she is believed to have had inside information about the disappearance of his first wife, Kathleen. And at the time, when news media came to ask him questions about that, she kind of, in a way, acted as a public relations director and helped him defend himself publicly.
Guilty of the crime of first-degree murder.
The infamous Robert Durst, a guilty man tonight after his trial in Los Angeles. A jury convicted the real estate heir for the first-degree murder of his best friend 20 years ago. For years, prosecutors have alleged Durst killed Susan Berman to hide evidence in the death of his wife, Kathy, in 1982.
If you threaten his freedom, he'll kill you.
Durst's undoing largely came after he seemingly implicated himself during the filming of a 2015 documentary.
So the wife disappears in 82. The investigation into her disappearance reopens around 2000, about the time he came here. Susan Berman gets murdered out in LA, and then you have Morris Black here in 2001.
Right.
It's a heck of a trail.
Yeah, and it may be incomplete. Those are cases that police know about. There are quite a few others that they suspect him in, but they were never able to make a case. And Of course, making a case on Robert Durst is no simple matter, as we've seen with the 3 cases that he's attributed to.
16-year-old Karen Mitchell was last seen leaving her aunt's shoe store in Eureka, California in November 1997. At the time, Robert Durst lived in the nearby town of Trinidad. According to police, Durst was seen at the store at least 3 times, once dressed as a woman. He'd also been spotted at the homeless shelter where Mitchell worked as a volunteer. A composite drawing of a suspect in the case appears similar to Durst taken in 2003 after he was arrested but later acquitted of murder in the killing and dismemberment of a Galveston neighbor. While Durst was on trial in Galveston, police tried to connect him to Mitchell's disappearance and that of an 18-year-old female college student who went missing in San Francisco in June 1997. But they never found a direct link to either victim. Now, though, Eureka police are taking another look.
We are certainly interested in any information that may or may not come out of interviews with Mr. Durst.
At the time, Lynn Schulze was finishing up her first semester at college. December 10th, 1971. She was supposed to be taking her final exams, but she never showed up. Instead, police say she talked about boarding a bus to New York and even came to the bus station that was in the same building as Durst's store. Well, she missed the bus, left, and then came back. She was last seen standing across the street. Police told us late this afternoon that it was a tip in 2012 which led them to investigate Robert Durst.
I don't like to use the term suspect per se. This is a person that's very interesting to us. We have had names of other people that have popped up that may have been suspicious, but we can't provide any tie of those people into the case. People that might have known her, a former boyfriend, that sort of thing, and we've ruled a lot of those people out.
Durst's wealth afforded him some of the best defense attorneys in the country, but last year his run from accusations finally ended. Durst was convicted of killing Susan Berman in 2000 in Los Angeles. Prosecutors say he killed Berman because she was going to expose the false alibi she provided to him when his wife, Kathy Durst, disappeared in 1982. After being sentenced to life in prison, Durst was then indicted for his wife's murder. He died this morning. We didn't think he would survive the trial. He had been in poor health for quite some time, Houston attorney Dick DeGuerin told us.
His death will bring peace to his family because they were afraid of him and his reach.
I think we basically made it very clear that we're going to go after everybody. Lawyers, prosecutors, police, friends of Durst who got paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to participate in this cover-up.
What do you remember most about him?
That he seemed to me, the times I met him, and I don't know if this is a fair read because I know pretty sure for a fact he didn't much like journalists, especially TV people who shove cameras in his face.
Those who are on the run for murder charges tend to not like our kind.
He always seemed to me, well, first of all, there was an oddness to him, even his body language. He was, this very small guy who seemed to be trying to blend in everywhere he went. And I saw him a number of times while I was living in Houston, just ran into him. And
that frailness, though, I always thought that was a disguise because he comes across as this frail, semi-infirmed, older man that, oh goodness, I'm kind of confused. Why am I here? Can you help me? I always thought that was part of his act.
Maybe. It's hard to say where reality and fantasy meet with Robert Durst because I'm not sure he could tell, frankly. But, well, there was that, and he's kind of emitted this hostility toward people. Now, that may have been having to do with him, in my case, being a journalist, but I think it was just there.
He just didn't like people, period.
He had a very sharp mind. He was a good businessman, but he's also terribly flawed.
Do you think he hated the publicity, but also at the same time loved the publicity?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Why else would you volunteer to sit for a national documentary knowing that there are police agencies looking at you as a suspect in murders and disappearances. It's kind of like he was thumbing his nose at the establishment.
And I still don't think we even began to scratch the surface of the life and crimes of Robert Durst. Nonetheless, that's our episode for this week. Thank you for joining us on the road. We're back next week, but it's a little bit different. My colleague, Zach Lashway, will be here with a cold case. Zach is doing something he refers to as the Z Files. He's looking at unsolved murders that happened in disadvantaged neighborhoods that did not get a lot of media attention. He's bringing these cases back into the public eye to hopefully generate new tips and get help for family members who never stopped fighting for justice for their loved ones. Remember, we stream a new episode of The Evidence Room every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. on KPRC 2+. So we're going to be back next Wednesday. I hope you have a great rest of your week.